Thou wast transfigured on the mount, O Christ our God, revealing thy glory to thy disciples as far as they could bear it. Let thine everlasting light shine upon us sinners, through the prayers of the Theotokos, O giver of light, glory to thee.
Hi there. My name is Father Thanasios Heros, and I'm the Dean here at the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Tarpon Springs, Florida. And I'm your host for Be Transfigured Ministries. Welcome to another episode of our Bible study on Romans, following the inspiration of the homilies of St John Chrysostom on the book of Romans. If you have been following our Bible study, you know that tonight's Bible study, which is session 5, will be following homily 4 in this wonderful book. This is a new translation by Father Panayoti Papageorgiou from Marietta, Georgia. Unfortunately, the book is currently out of print, so everyone here in the room has copies of the homilies, and you'll just have to follow along on the video. So that's incentive for you to come and join us in person here in Tarpon Springs most Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. There is also a study guide for tonight's Bible study, which you can find on my website at www.liveanewlifeinchrist.org. Follow the link for Bible study on Romans. You will see study guides, and you will see the videos of past sessions so you can get all caught up. I might encourage, on some evening having a, what do they call it, binge watching of the Bible study on Romans. So if you have a few hours you'd like to sit in front of your computer, I would definitely invite you to do so. So without further ado, let's go ahead and say our opening prayer and get started. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Shine within our hearts, loving Master, the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds that we may comprehend the message of your gospel. Instill in also reverence for your blessed commandments, so that having conquered sinful desires, we may pursue a spiritual life, thinking and doing all those things which are pleasing to you. For you, Christ our God, are the light of our souls and bodies, and to you we give glory, together with your Father, who is without beginning, and your all-holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, always, now, and forever, and to the ages of ages. Amen. So tonight's Bible study is going to be a difficult one. First of all, he only covers 2 verses in this entire homily. And if you read the homily in advance, you know that he's very hard on us. St. John Chrysostom really gives it to us this week. And so we will try and maneuver through it the best we can. I also want to give a little bit of disclaimer that the topics tonight happen to be very hot topics in our contemporary society. We're talking about sexuality tonight, and we're talking about how to live according to God's will. And so it's going to be a little, maybe some difficult conversation tonight, but we can never abandon the Word of God. We can never abandon the truth of the Church, and we will maneuver whatever we need to maneuver without disobeying the Church. So our homily tonight covers chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, just 2 verses. So as a reminder, because we have someone new tonight, so Vicky, I'm going to ask you to, if you want to move the microphone closer to yourself. It's not on right now, but when you want to read or have a question, to just move the microphone closer, make sure you turn it on. It takes about 2 seconds to cycle through, so that way the sound goes through also to the video. They're only seeing my beautiful face. So you don't have to worry about being in front of the camera, but the voices are definitely going to go through. And again, on behalf of those who watch the videos after the fact, thank you again to all of you for your patience, to having the camera here, having the microphones in front of you, because I know sometimes that can be a little intimidating, huh? They're not already on. They're off. Mine is on. So there's a little button on yours. Only when you need to speak, because otherwise, if all the microphones are on, it begins to pick up everybody through all the microphones, and it becomes a little echoey in the video. So, who wants to read verses 26 and 27? Wait a minute. Wait. We have to turn the microphone on, and so they can hear you. Give it a second to cycle through. Okay.
For this reason, God gave them up to vile passions. For even their women exchanged the natural use of what is against nature. Likewise, also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust, for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which was due.
Okay, so you can see this is a pretty high fire topic, especially considering the social atmosphere that we find ourselves in today in our contemporary society. So one of the things we want to start right off is that Chrysostom helps us understand that all passions are disgraceful, but lust cuts deeper. I've said this before, I don't know if in this particular Bible study, but all sin is sin. Just like all cuts are cuts. Some sins cut deeper into our soul, just as you have a paper cut and you have a laceration. Both technically are cuts. But the deeper the wound, the harder to heal, the longer to heal, right? And the deeper the pain. The same thing is true in our passions. All of our passions, all of our sins are sinful. And all of them are disgraceful. Lust, however, is one of those that digs deeper. And right off the bat, he says here, the soul suffers and is dishonored by sins more than the body is by disease. So we've got this body that is struggling. We got the body that is fallen, the body that is theoretically broken, and the body suffers. The soul, on the other hand, suffers greater when sin is brought into it, because that's something that is, albeit not completely, we can't be sinless, only God is sinless, but when we involve the passions, part of the deeper sin, the deeper wound, is because we bring it upon ourselves, right? So if our body gets cancer, or if our body gets a cut, or our body gets a cold, these are things that are normally beyond our control, unless we're going around in infectious areas. So although the body gets wounded, it's not as bad as the soul wound in terms of the passions. And lust, because it's something we do to ourselves, goes even deeper. And this is why tonight's topic is so difficult to discuss. So again, Chrysostom points out what St. Paul's saying, that women and men, they both exchanged what they had. There's a typo there in the study guide. Exchanged what they had. They were not forced into their behavior. And that's an important thing there, that word exchanged that St. Paul uses. And later he'll talk about the difference between a woman who is forced into sexual perversion has less culpability than a man, because the woman was forced into things beyond her control, right? So there's not as much, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but in that sense. So here he has the difference between being forced and doing something in our own will. And that's why St. Paul uses the word exchanged, because men and women had what was holy. Men and women had each other, and they had in marriage the holy expression of sexuality. But they exchanged that. They gave away what they had in exchange for something that they thought they wanted. And this is what causes the difficulty. This is the lust, right? So you had something holy and you gave it up. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is something now, because, and we talked a little bit about this last week, because they are unwilling to be led by God, they have no excuse. God tried to help them. God tried to guide us, not just them. But because that they were unwilling to have God's help, then they have no excuse. This is paragraph 3 on page 59 of the homily. Chrysostom says, when God takes his blessing away from a pleasure, now remember, he's talking about pleasure here, this is sexuality, but it doesn't have to be sexuality. When God takes his blessing away from a pleasure, everything is upside down. So you have, God gave us these beautiful opportunities to come together in marriage, and when we move out of the holiness of that, everything turns upside down. And so it's no longer blessed by God, it's no longer a blessing to us, it's no longer holy, and we begin our descent, as it were. Here Paul, as I wrote here, that Paul invokes nature to strengthen his argument. You have that actually going on today in our society. People will talk about what is natural as a way to say, look, we're not making this stuff up. This is really how humanity was created. Humanity was created male and female, and there's an appropriate relationship there, and there's a natural progress here. So St. Paul is using nature to build up his defense. He's not saying that what God is talking about is going against nature. He's saying God gave us what is natural. We're the ones that have exchanged what is natural. We had the natural, and we're going for the unnatural. Here Chrysostom says, for he wishes both to speak with dignity and also to sting his audience. It was not possible to do both because one hindered the other. For if you shall speak with dignity, you will not be able to attack your audience. But if you wish to assail them vehemently, you must reveal what you are saying in clearer terms. But Paul's prudent and blessed soul had the strength to do both with exactness. That's paragraph 6, page 59 in the homily. In other words, and we talked a little bit about this last week, Vasily, when you asked me, how could Paul have gone in and said these things? Because he was speaking from the foundation of the truth. And so Paul has not only the spiritual truth that's lifting him up in terms of his position, but also the natural truth. So he's able to really, you might want to say blamelessly, bring forth this very bold statement about the sexuality and about sin going on in the community. Okay. Look, any day you turn the TV on, you can see how this particular topic is not welcomed any conversation. Right? So no matter what side of the conversation you fall on, you're going to be ridiculed, you're going to be this, you're going to be that. St. Paul is safe from that because he's coming from both directions. He's coming from godliness and he's coming from nature. And the two are coming together. So, and it also helps that, as a reminder from last week's conversation, that St. Paul sees this message as not his. He is simply giving the gospel of God. He is simply sharing what God wants us all to know. So he has no vested interest in its reception. So if everyone decides to stone him, which eventually they try to, if that's what they wish to do, that's their prerogative, right? He has no vested interest because what he's doing is he's simply sharing the gospel of God. So he's kind of elevating himself above that accusation. Maybe might be the good word for it. Just stop me if you have any questions. So, continuing, Chrysostom says, greediness, not just things about money, leads to sin. Everything that transgresses the law established by God lusts after monstrous deeds and does not desire those things that are ordered and governed by law and custom. Paragraph 8, page 60. So again, he's talking about that lust, not just in the sexual sense, but when we want something that we shouldn't have, that level of greediness. Okay, that's when it begins to bring us into transgression, because we begin to want worse and worse and worse. And I think we probably see this if we use different examples outside of the sexual realm for tonight's conversation. We see that when we want things that we shouldn't have, what happens? We tend to want worse and worse and worse. It happens with drugs. It happens with alcohol, right? Next thing you know, one drink's not enough, we need two. Next thing you know, one pill's not enough, we need two pills, etc. And so that greediness, that desire for more, brings us further and further along. And in Chrysostom's words, we lust after monstrousness. This is a monstrous deeds, and does not desire those things that are ordered and governed by law and custom. Law here, he's talking about the Christian law and the natural law, not just the civil law. Right? So this, and again, that's why I brought in here, not just financial greed. When we want something that isn't good for us, when we want something that we don't have any business wanting, right? We're feeding that passion of ours, which brings back to the very first point, right? All passions are disgraceful. And our challenge as Christians, as Orthodox Christians, is that we are called to live a life of struggling to defeat our passions, as opposed to giving in to our passions, because our passions are fallen. Our passions are, we no longer have righteous anger, we no longer have righteous desire, we have fallen passions, and so they lead us astray. Make sure you put your microphone on, and put the microphone down a little bit so they can hear you at home. Put it down. There you go.
Well, before you go any further, can you clarify on the topic? Because this is a difficult topic.
It is.
It is. And I would like to make sure I'm on the same page with you. I have to speak plainly.
Yeah.
Is he speaking here of sexual perversion?
Yes.
Or is he speaking of homosexuality? Or is it both?
I would say it's both, because St. Paul says very specifically, for even their women exchange the natural use, likewise also the men. So the natural use is for men with women together.
Okay. So
right?
He is addressing homosexuality in this.
Homosexuality, but he's also talking about perversion.
Perversion.
Because what is natural is a husband and a wife. Not with a man and 13 women, or a woman with 13 men. So it's not just homosexuality. It's what we would say is what's the word for it? A fornication, right? So this is sexuality outside of the blessed confines of marriage. That's very specifically what he's talking about here.
There's also perversion inside marriage.
Of course, there is perversion inside of marriage.
Give me. There is.
And there is, and that becomes abusive and things like that.
All right.
Later in the homily, Chrysostom actually talks about, actually it might be the next point, I can't remember. No, it comes down a little bit later. Well, let's just jump down to it real fast because you mention it. Go down about 3 points. It says on the study guide, social law does not equal moral. Because it was legal for men to do what they were doing at that time, they didn't consider it bad behavior. This is more dangerous because they are tricked into inaction against sin. And I just put here, look ahead to Romans 1:32, and it says here, who knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, and now listen to this, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. So there's this lulling to sleep. This lulling to sleep, and that's one of the reasons why this particular topic is so difficult in today's contemporary society, because as Christians, as Orthodox Christians, we have an acceptable moral position. Sexuality is between a husband and a wife in marriage, end of story. Anything beyond that is sinful. Whether it's heterosexual or homosexual, it is sinful. What's happening in society is tricking our people into believing that other forms of sexuality, because they are legal now, don't need to be fought against internally. I don't mean fighting against politically. That's a totally different topic. Whether we should be marching down the streets, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about our life. So just a parenthesis to remind ourselves, St. Paul was very particular. He addressed the church. So these are teachings for the church. He doesn't expect the teachings of the church to be enforced by society. And we'll get to that later on in Romans. He also talks about it in Corinthians. So he definitely distinguishes between those in the church and those outside the church. But for our purposes, one of the reasons this is important is that the church has a way of life given to us by God. Okay, and what St. Paul is talking, what St. John Chrysostom is talking about, is that when we give up what is natural, we are going against God's desire for us. When we go against God's desire for us, it cuts deeply into our soul. It doesn't have to be sexuality. It happens that he talks about sexuality here. But later, in the next few verses, which we're not talking about tonight, but it's covered here, the next few verses, he lists all the other sins. Okay? But he's starting here because it's so personal to people. And it's so rampant. And because it was legal, it wasn't seen as bad. Because the men could do whatever they wanted. That was the case in ancient Greece too. Men had a certain privilege in sexuality that women didn't have, right? And that's why later St. John Chrysostom kind of eases off of the women and gives it even harder to the men, because they have a greater responsibility, because the women are doing things beyond their control, against their will, and so they have a little bit less of a culpability than the men do. So he's calling men to a high standard. So, and going back now, going back two points up, I want to talk briefly about temptation versus sin. Putting things into action creates a greater risk. So when you're talking about sexuality, and I really want to talk about this because this is what is the hot topic, in our society. It is not sinful to be tempted with a desire. That's temptation. Temptation is not sin. Where we become more dangerous, and you've heard me say in various sermons before, that the longer we entertain the temptation, the closer we get to sin, the more dangerous it becomes. Right? But we have to make the distinction. And this is what St. Paul's talking about here. He's not talking about temptation. He's not talking about what we would hear today as homosexual tendencies. He's not talking about it being sinful that men are attracted to other men, right? Or women attracted to other women. That's temptation. What he's talking about here is when you've actively given over and exchanged what you had for the things that you want that may not be good for us. Okay, so it's important to remember that temptation is not sin. The longer we entertain a temptation, the greater the risk is, and the harder it is. If you'll excuse the language, it's actually kind of what we talk about when I talk about with our kids in sexuality. The harder it is to put the brakes on, right? So we teach kids, don't go into a car alone with somebody of the opposite sex, right? Driving in a car with the opposite sex is itself not sinful, but it becomes additionally dangerous because now the temptation is growing, right? And it becomes harder and harder and harder to put the brakes on to stop the sin. So I want to make that very clear. He's not talking about temptation here. He's not talking about I guess they talk about proclivity in today's society and the things that we're inclined to, but the action is what we're really fighting against. And that's why when the society says it's okay, we are lulled to sleep, and we no longer fight against the temptation, and that's where we get in trouble. But that's not limited to sexuality. Our society glorifies greed, right? And so it's not seen as bad in our society to seek after money. So people don't think they have to stop their greed. So this is not just limited to sexuality. Chrysostom talks about a fourfold attack by the devil. Okay, in this particular topic, he's talking about dividing women and men. So he divides the one into two, because remember, going all the way back to Adam and Eve, we were one. And in marriage, we are one. And so when the devil is able to divide those two, now he creates two instead of one. That's why he gets his name Diabolos, the one who divides. So his first attack against humanity is he's dividing men from women. And he goes all the way back to Adam and Eve for that. And he pits them against each other. He pits us against each other. Number two, the devil excites the two parts to war against each other. Attack number three, he encourages nature to be ignored. And number four, the devil attacks the human race by limiting procreation. So all of this is demonic, right? So if men are having relations with men and women are having relations with women, what stops? Procreation. And so the devil gets his way into the human race, begins to die off. Because remember, the devil is against us. And so any way that he can get the human race to struggle and the human race to die off, he gets a victory. And so these four struggles for him, but he wouldn't be able to get this unless he pits us up against each other, right? And having nothing to do with sexuality, what are some of the things you're seeing in today's society? You're seeing men and women standing up and saying, we don't need the other gender. We can be who we are by ourselves. Okay? And so this is, in my opinion, I would say it's a fulfillment of what Chrysostom was warning about here. You are seeing, especially now with some of the gender questions going on in our society, and you're starting to see now with adoption and fertilization and all this kind of thing, you're seeing that men and women are actually beginning to live as if they don't need each other. And the devil wins because he continues to divide us further and further along. Okay? That's why I think it's an important struggle for us to fight against the devil. They don't call him Diabolos for nothing, the great divider. All right, so this is now paragraph 22 and 24, pages 63 and 64 in the homily. Ignoring nature leads to not being truly human. So before I read the quote, just to remind you, the word anthropos in Greek, anatropos, which means two things. It means that we walk in an upright fashion, anatropos, in an upward fashion. But it also means anatropos, face to face, prosopo a prosopo. The only way to be truly human is for us to be in a relationship with each other, male and female. That is humanity. God created humanity, male and female. He created them, it says in the scriptures. And so we need each other. Men need women and women need men. And as St. Paul will say later in the letter, one is not more important than the other. Contrary to some cultural beliefs, men are not superior to women, and women are not superior to men. We have a need for each other, not only for our physical existence, but for our spiritual salvation, right? We find our unity in those relationships. So when the devil is able to destroy that, he makes it more difficult for us to find ourselves as true humans. Okay? Because now we're isolated. Now it's just ourselves. You cannot be truly human by yourself. I'm not saying you can only be truly human in a male-female relationship. You can be in a community, but in isolation, there is no true human being. Okay, that's that anotropos, prosopa a prosopa, face to face, that we have our relationship existence. And again, that's the image of God. Because the image of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, is a relationship. It's not just the Father. It is not the Son in isolation. There's always the relationships. We lose our true humanity when we ignore nature. So listen to what Chrysostom says here. You did not change into that nature, and this is talking about gender here. You did not change into that nature that belongs to women, nor did you keep the nature that you used to have. You have become a traitor common to both natures, and you deserve to be driven out by men and women, and to be stoned to death by both, because you have done wrong to both sexes. For it is not the same thing to change into the female sex and to become a woman while staying a man, but rather it is to be neither man nor woman. Now, that's an interesting position that he's saying. First of all, I think it's a glimpse into the ancient world. So this struggle with sexuality, this struggle with gender, is not a new thing. Interesting that Chrysostom in, 375? Is that our agreed to time frame? 375 to 385, right? At that time, he's talking about sex changes. So this is not a new struggle for humanity. So what he's helping us understand is, okay, so now we can understand that the exact contemporary struggle that we're having today is as ancient days. But what Chrysostom's adding to the mix here, he says, you didn't become a woman, you became neither. As a man, you gave up what you had with women in exchange for men, but you're not a woman. And the same thing if woman says, so you deserve to be exiled from both because you're not loyal to either one. Almost as if to say it would have been better for a man to become a woman. He didn't quite say that, but he's pointing out, and obviously they didn't have sex change surgeries back then like they have today. But I find it interesting that he's bringing this up. So this is the year between 375 and 385. It's obviously not a new struggle. Okay. Does that give us any kind of comfort for today? I think if anything, it should give us some ease of mind that if we trust the church, if we trust the Holy Spirit, we've maneuvered through these issues before and we can get through them again. Okay? Yep, just turn your microphone on so people can hear you back home.
Do I dare, though?
Of course. Look, and by the way, because I know you haven't been here the past couple weeks yet, the people watching at home have told me numerous times they benefit from hearing other people's thoughts and other people's comments and questions because they can't be here tonight.
Okay.
But they're participating by hearing our conversation, so trust me.
I want you to stay on your agenda and complete your class, but I don't want you to get sidetracked because of my question.
That's all right. What's the question? I promise you, if the question has to be held off, we'll hold it off.
Thank you. I just have a few problems, and I'm sure others are thinking what I'm thinking. I wish it was this clear cut, because that's why I asked, what are we talking about? Are we talking about perversion? Are we talking about giving in to our temptations, all the struggles that we go through in everything in life, or are we talking about homosexuality? When it comes to, it seems like I can see the highest end of the spectrum, real perversion. I think anybody would agree it's wrong. It's sin. It's taking you away from God. There's something wrong with that. But it's when sexuality has a gamut. it's not the same for all people. And
Right. That's true.
so that's where our lines get blurred, and this is where it's difficult for people to say what's right, what's wrong, and the church is there to guide us on that. I totally agree with you. If you get confused, find out what the church says about it. But there's such a range that I have I wish he could have been a little bit more specific in some, I hate to say it, a little bit more specific, because like as a nurse, as an ICU nurse, there's even an organization for these children. There's hundreds, I wouldn't say more than that, but there's hundreds of children born every day that have two sexes. They don't have one sex, and it's a Greek word for it, I forgot. They're not born as boy or girl. They're born as with both.
Right.
And they even I went to a seminar where the physicians also said, I don't want you yelling out, it's a boy, it's a girl. Just say, it's healthy, you know.
In those cases, you
and
mean.
we'll deal with it, you know. But now this child who's born with two, the parents are faced with the decision to choose a sex. I mean, it becomes a real struggle for this family.
I can believe it.
And for the children. And this was no fault of the child. This was not temptation. This was not desire.
Right.
This was not giving in to sin. This was none of that. They were so there's a gamut of sexuality in the human
Yeah.
race.
But
So
let me just
this
pause
is
you
where I
right there.
get
Let me just pause you right there. Although Chrysostom does not talk about children born with both genitalia,
I mean, there's so many situations.
it is at least obvious to me that falls in the category of a physical abnormality.
It is.
Chrysostom and Paul are not talking about physical abnormalities here.
Okay.
They're talking about desire and lust. So leaving how children, and I don't know what the current official percentage is.
Sure.
No one would deny that those are
They may have a problem.
that those are real physical abnormalities, right? No human being normally is born with both genders.
Okay.
So, but that's in the physical abnormality category. So when it comes to this topic, it has nothing to do with this topic.
And I'll be
Right.
blunt. It always, thank you for that answer.
Now, you
I
could say,
that answer.
using today's,
In other words, it's an anomaly.
it is an anomaly, and all scientists would accept it is an anomaly.
Right.
Right. Where it might eventually become part of today's contemporary debate is if the parents chose one
And the child.
and the child later in life has a hormonal balance of the other, then there's going to be a conflict there. I get that, but that's in its own category because
I think that was my point, is that
But
I
on
don't
the-
know if I could be too cut and dry here. You know?
But so that's its own category. On the question, though, of sexual perversion and the broad spectrum of sexuality, most sociologists today and psychologists today, and I'm not quite sure I totally agree with them, but this is what they say. There's actually no such thing as heterosexual and homosexual. Scientists today basically accept that there is a spectrum,
Yes.
and that everyone, to a certain degree or another, has a little bit of both. It might be 99-1, or it might be 50-50, but this is what scientists are telling us today. I can accept that. I will accept what science is telling us is the scientific data. But when it comes to perversion, this is where I think it becomes a very easy conversation. First, we have to find the common point of departure.
And what is it?
The common point of departure is that there is universal, maybe universal is a big word. There is definitely a plurality, a majority of people would easily agree that certain perversions go too far. Okay, everyone I've ever spoken with can all agree that certain things should be forbidden.
Right.
To me, that's the departing point. That's the common element. We're not saying if there is for better or for worse, we'll call it universal acceptance. If we're all willing to agree that there is a line there, then at least we can have an honest conversation of where the line is. And that's where our current political environment has gone askew. Because the political environment is denying a line exists for their purposes, but that it exists for another purpose. So there's not an honest conversation going on. But when I have a conversation with people, I'm willing to say, do you agree that certain forms of sexuality should be forbidden? If they say yes, I said, now that's our common point of departure. We don't agree on where that line is, maybe, but don't tell me there's not an actual line. And that line has absolutely changed in both directions over the centuries.
Well, what would your comment or St. John Chrysostom's comment, do you think, would be on like teenagers who have this confusion, or I hear that teenagers are suppressing their homosexuality or something and they commit suicide, and that if they were allowed,
which is true, which is sadly true.
Yes, and it's true. So what would your comment be on that? Is it a spiritual sickness that they felt so strongly that way that they'd rather be dead? Or was it really that we were suppressing their, this is what the world says, you're suppressing their nature to the point where now they're dead?
So, and this is,
he would comment.
And this is what I think he would comment, that there is this struggle going on. There is what is natural, and then there is a desire. But one thing where we're going to move to next is our life application, and the very first one, without the fear of God, all that is good goes, by the way, there's another typo, goes to ruin. So, before we get there, I'll just say that I pray that someone who feels a particular struggle, okay, tonight's topic happens to be sexuality, where the real harm is done is when that particular person is led to believe that where their temptation is does not have to be fought against. Okay, I'll use myself as an example. My struggle happens to be food. Now, in the Orthodox understanding, my gluttony is no less sinful than someone else's sexual lust. It's true. Sin is sin. Now, as Chrysostom pointed out, sexual lust digs deeper because it attacks my soul in a different place. However, it is sinfully the same. It might be less spiritually dangerous, but as sin is sin, my struggle against gluttony is no less sinful than someone else's struggle against a particular sexual perversion. Now, if I go in life and I am led to believe that my obesity is not dangerous for me, and I become 200 pounds, and then 300 pounds, and then 700 pounds, and then 900 pounds, what's happening to me? My desire to not admit that my particular passion should be fought against leads me to greater and greater danger. Now I'm 900 pounds, I can't get off the bed, I have to be buried in a piano box. We know all those stories from all those years ago, right? Would there be anyone who agrees that that's not dangerous for me? So what do I have to do? I have to put up a daily fight against my particular passion of gluttony. Some days are better than others. And in the past 15 years, I have lost over 500 pounds. The same 100 pounds over and over again. I have successful seasons where it comes off, and I have unsuccessful seasons where it comes back on again. It's a continual struggle for me. Where I will eventually die is if I give up the fight against it. And that's where the greatest danger of the sexual perversions lie. It's not whether or not we're successful every day in fighting against our passions. It's if we give up the fight.
So could I make this statement and be correct?
We'll
if
see.
I said,
well, we'll see.
yeah, and that's what I'm asking you to tell me if I am correct. He's not saying change your nature, and we've failed with a lot of our youth and a lot of people who struggle against this, where they just would rather be dead. It's just so overwhelming, and they do. They kill themselves, and this is where I have compassion for them, that I'm sorry that they felt that bad, that they felt they had to take their life, and some of them are young. But is the failure then in today's society that if they got help, would the help be to change their nature or their desire, or would the help be just to help them to learn to live with that? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
In other words,
so
they've got places that
right,
try
so
to
look,
reprogram
you can't pray the gay away.
Right, that's what
All
I'm
right,
saying.
that whole you can pray the gay away. Now, there's a variety of theories. There's, doctors say one thing, doctors say another. Most scientists tell us that sexuality is somehow inherent within us. All right. I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a doctor. I will accept that at face value. As a Christian, I will say that doesn't mean my behavior shouldn't be fought against.
Okay.
And this, again, is where the conversation is no longer honest in the political environment. Because the same person, and then we're going to move on. The same person who says, because someone's nature is this, they should be able to become that.
Yes.
That exact same person will not say that if the nature happens to be pedophilia.
Yes.
And that's where it's not an honest conversation. So that's where you have to say, where's our agreeing point? Are we willing to agree that it's not really about because I feel this way, it's okay? Right? If someone is willing to agree that, no, there are legitimate conversations, now that's your point of departure. Because if everything is about I was made this way and therefore I have to be this way, then every perversion by definition is okay. And society doesn't say that. Right? That's the so-called slippery slope that they talk about in politics. So let's move on, because I think this helps us a little bit, maybe bring some closure. I told you tonight's topic was difficult, didn't I? Right? But I'm committed to speaking what the church teaches. We're not, huh? What was that? No, I'm not. Well, what I meant to say was I'm not going to pretend what the church teaches is not what the church teaches, right? It's because we're just going to say what it. But I think in this particular topic, the church has got the raw end of the deal, because the devil has gotten a hold of society and is turning someone against the church. And so part of this suicide question is the church cannot help someone who has been led to believe and therefore accepted in their heart that the church has no position. If you're led to believe that your church is hateful, then you won't listen to your church. And now society has pitched you against your church. And that's where we begin to have some serious things. Okay, so let's look at page 65 in the homily, paragraph 31. Without the fear of God, all that is good goes to ruin. For nothing, I repeat, nothing so destroys a human being as slipping away from this anchor. In the same way, nothing saves a man as does keeping his eye fixed on this fear. For if by keeping our eyes fixed on a man we become more hesitant about committing sin, and if, because we are apt to blush in the presence of the gentler servants in the house, we often refrain from doing what is disgusting or out of place, consider that we will enjoy every security if we keep God before our eyes. Think about that. When you talk about some of these heinous sexual crimes, they're always done in secret. Because if they wouldn't be done in front of other people, because even the most, I shouldn't say all the heinous, but even heinous people are ashamed to do certain things in public. Right? So he's saying if the simple things we control ourselves by seeing another human being, if we constantly keep God before our eyes, it will help keep us in a better place. To me, that's the joy of icons. When people come to me in their own particular struggles, specifically sexual sins with pornography and this and that, I always tell everybody, surround your life with icons. The more icons you have around you, the less likely you will be to ignore God's presence. Put them on your computer, put them in your car, put them everywhere. So as soon as you turn your computer on, what do you see? You see an icon of Jesus Christ. The more we can keep God in front of our eyes, the better our chances are that we're not going to fall into these various temptations. Not a guarantee, because after all, but what happened with Adam and Eve? It wasn't until they took their eyes off of God that they ate the fruit. Right? What happened to St. Peter when he's sinking? He took his eyes off of God, he began to sink. The more we keep God in our eyes, the better our chances are to fight against temptation. Point number 2. When we ignore our given tasks, we suffer. Page 66, paragraph 34. For we have been sent to accomplish many urgent tasks. If we neglect these and stand around gaping at unprofitable things, because we have squandered all our time in vain and to no purpose, we shall pay the extreme penalty. If you read the whole sermon there, you'll get a deeper idea of what he's talking about here. But basically, if we waste our time on menial things, things that don't matter, trivial things in our life, then we're losing the opportunities to do the things that we're supposed to be doing, is basically his point here. Okay, so we have to be vigilant and get the things done that we're supposed to be getting done. The example he gives here is of a servant who's been given a task by his master, and he goes into town and he does this distraction, that distraction, this distraction, this. Now, next thing you know, he doesn't get his task done, and he is punished by the master. We have a task to do. When we get surrounded by all these trivial things, then we don't get our important work done, meaning our spiritual work. Point number 3. And again here, this is to show that this is not just about sexuality. There is nothing special about wealth. This is page 66 and 67. It's paragraphs 35 and 37. I'm going to skip and read a little bit of both, so I'll read it from my copy here. Why do you stand gaping with eager excitement at the sight of riches? What is so wonderful about wealth that it can hold your eyes fixed on it? You keep looking at horses. I want to pause right here. That just proves to you that from Chrysostom's vantage point, Paul's not just talking about sexuality, because now he's gone into the other temptations, especially with wealth, right? So to me, that's proof that while he mentions sexuality, he's not limiting this topic to sexuality. I'll start again. Why do you stand gaping with eager excitement at the sight of riches? What is so wonderful about wealth that it can hold your eyes fixed on it? You keep looking at horses with gold trappings, house slaves, some barbarians, some eunuchs, extravagant and expensive garments, and an enervated soul wearing them. You fix your eyes on eyebrows raised in haughtiness, people running around in tumults. And for what reason do these rich men deserve your wonder? For even if they wear ornaments of gold, and now I'm paragraph 37, for even if they wear ornaments of gold, they are especially to be pitied on this account, because these things that are nothing to them are the things they seek after and desire all the more eagerly. Please do not look at the garments they wear, but uncover their souls and see if they are not filled with countless wounds, and if they are not clothed in rags, if they are not destitute, if they are not stripped of every defense. I promise you, and I've witnessed it with my own life, the wealthiest of wealthy are miserable, because every dollar they don't have is a dollar they want. And they chase, and they chase, and they chase. And trust me, in my own experience with these people, they're miserable on the inside. Okay? And this is what Chrysostom is telling us here. Point number 4. Real peace comes from virtue. Paragraph 38, page 67. It is better to be a poor man and to live a life of virtue than to be a king and live a wicked life. The poor man enjoys every luxury of the soul. He does not even see his outward poverty because of the wealth within him. But the king, living in luxury amid things that are not proper or befitting, is punished in the things that really make the greatest difference to him and are the most important. I mean, in his soul, in his reasoning powers, in his conscience, the things that will go with him to the life hereafter. Wow. Wow. And I warned you weeks ago, right? Chrysostom holds no punches against the wealthy. Right? And keep in mind, now he's a priest in Antioch, so this is a cosmopolitan city in the ancient world. So this is very similar to our world. This is not just some village where he's a priest. This is the city of Antioch that he's writing these, and these are real sermons given in church, right? But I mean, there's the old saying, you can't, you can't take the U-Haul to the cemetery, right? But how many people, and they live every day of their life, and this is what they're searching for, and they're never happy because it's never enough. They're never content. So again, the comforting point here is that Chrysostom has moved away from sexuality to prove that this is just an example that St. Paul is talking about, right? So the theme here is that we're giving up what we have for things that we think we want, that God knows we don't need. Right? Now, he's not saying we don't need food, we don't need clothing. And he's not even saying these things are sinful in and of themselves. But he's saying, look, the poor person is much more content. I've met many people in my life who, and for those of you who have been involved in any kind of charitable endeavor, the most generous people are those who don't have much to give away, because they know what it's like to be in need. And they're always much more generous. I will never forget. I hope I will never forget. One day in South Carolina, we were going to a Thanksgiving, we were handing out Thanksgiving meals. And my station was the bread station. And every family got basically the fixings for a Thanksgiving meal. A turkey, beans, potatoes, whatever. And I had the bread station. And there was enough bread for every family to get 2 loaves of bread. I will never forget this very moving moment. A woman comes to my station very clearly in need. This was not a nice part of town. I mean, anyway. And I offered 2 loaves of bread. And she said to me, I don't need 2 loaves of bread. Give the second loaf to someone who needs it more than I do. That has stuck in my heart since that moment. She clearly needed bread. But she knew there were people who had greater need than that. And so she gave up her other loaf of bread to another family. It has stuck with me to this very day. And I hope I never lose that feeling that I had of pure awe for this woman's love. She wasn't greedy at all. Wasn't greedy at all. All right, our send-off, as we do every week, St. John Chrysostom offers us a send-off. Our send-off tonight, paragraph 39, page 67. Let us take up a life of virtue and the pleasure it brings. Let's not seek after those other things. Let's really be committed to a life of virtue. It's actually even built into our Divine Liturgy prayers. You know, seeking the life of virtue and praying for those who live a life of virtue. Because that's where we're going to find the real peace in our hearts. Questions, thoughts? Told you it was a heavy topic tonight. Any questions, thoughts? All right, turn your microphone on. We have a few extra minutes.
The problem that I see with all of this thing in today's society, and we'll go back to homosexuality. Let's go back to that.
Okay.
Second.
It is the hot button topic of our day.
Hot button topic, transgenderism, and so on and so forth. In our society today, we not only promote it, but we exploit it so much that it's always in front of us. You turn on the television or you turn on your computer and you go to the, let's say, the entertainment section, or you go to you're always bombarded with these thoughts and quotes that this is okay, you can do this. It's allowed. And it really just baffles the hell out of me because of the fact that, yes, we do have guidelines to live by on a daily basis, but yet this is where the devil works against us. Okay, this is where the devil works against us and does everything to incite different feelings in our hearts and in our minds.
Right.
And the most difficult part for us as human beings, in my opinion, is to actually find the point of acceptance or non-acceptance, because we are influenced by a society that, as you mentioned earlier, is greedy, is illicit, and always doesn't look out for the benefit of our human and spiritual needs.
Well, I would go so far as say society never looks out for our spiritual
Those are the
needs.
things, that I find, and I understand everything. Well, I understand. I mean, I accept everything that he's saying. But, and I think of two things. One is the fact that he is back in the 300s discussing these. Correct.
Yeah, right. So it's been 1,700 years and we're still fighting over it. Yep.
I mean, we are still fighting, and we're still sitting here saying, what in the heck are we supposed to do? I mean, really?
Right. And that's why I believe this with my entire being. I believe Orthodox Christianity has the answer. And the answer is, we all struggle against sin. It's not about do we get it right every time. It's about, are we struggling against it? Are we struggling to live how God wants us to live? That's why Christ says, whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Deny yourself, step number one. It ain't about what I want all the time. Number two, the Christian life is a cross. It is difficult. It is a challenge. And then we follow God into heaven. The truth, though, is, in our understanding of sin, we don't have good sins and bad sins, and we have sin. And I can just as easily tell someone who's struggling with sexual sins, look, your struggle is no different, spiritually speaking, as anyone else's struggle. Part of our society's failure is they've become enraptured with sexuality. Again, I think that's part of the devil's plan, because one of the reasons sexuality cuts deeper into our soul is because it is part of our very existence.
You can do more damage.
Right? Because if men no longer have a need for women, the human race ends. Right? Also why I believe that part of the demonic influence is to do away with the need for men and women. You've got cloning, and you've got this, and you've got that. All of those things, to me personally speaking, now I'm not saying the church says this. This is, I mean, it's very clear, disclaimer, if you're watching at home, for me, Father Athanasios, these are all indicators that the devil is at the root of all of this. Because the more he destroys our humanity, the more he separates us from God.
You know, Thomas Bacon, who is a famous philosopher, political philosopher, wrote The Leviathan and so on and so forth, made one statement that really jumps out at me when we're talking about a subject like this. And he says, man is basically an animal. He was obviously talking in a socialistic and a political direction. Which brings to mind that part of these urges that we have, which is to conquer, whether we want to believe that or not, is that part of our animalistic instincts that we inherited? And the answer, I think, is yes.
I don't think you could say otherwise. I mean, we definitely have animal urges, and animal not in the pejorative. We are a physical animal that has to reproduce and things like that. That is also why if you pay very close attention to the political topics that are in this sexuality range, there's always a desire to find the one example in the other animal kingdom which verifies homosexuality or whatever. All they need to do is find one homosexual dog as evidence that this is as natural as any other animal instinct. But we are not mere animals. We are human beings, and we are the only animal on the face of the planet that has been given the very breath of God. And we do hold ourselves to a higher standard. And anyone who's willing to have an honest conversation, for example, if we were mere animals, men could do whatever they wanted to women, just like they do in the animal kingdom. But we're human beings. We call ourselves to a higher standard. We have self-control, or at least we should have self-control. If we were just mere animals, there's no such thing as self-control. We take what we want until someone stops us. But self-control is a human dignity. So, on the one hand, people want to agree that humans have self-control. There's a saying out there that in today's society, the only bad sex is unwanted sex.
Oh.
Okay? Now, meaning, as long as you want it, you can have it. It's meaning rape, right? That's the unwanted sex.
Oh. Okay.
Right? The only bad sex is rape, meaning it's something that has been forced upon you. Well, that's what society is telling you. But my point is this: in honest conversations, people talk about self-control. They talk about limitations. Those are real, honest conversations. So let's start there. Okay, do we agree that self-control is something that people should have? If a man should have self-control because he's attracted to little boys, then a man should have self-control if he's attracted to women who's not his wife, then a man should have self-control who's attracted to other men, etc., etc. If self-control is a human dignity, then self-control is human dignity. Then we can maybe disagree with what we should challenge ourselves against, but let's be honest with what we've got. You sure? Okay.
But can we...
Microphone.
Is it correct to end this with, you hate the sin but love the sinner?
Yeah, but you can't say that anymore. You're not allowed to say that kind of stuff anymore.
Allowed to say that anymore?
Because in today's society, that's become a what's the word?
What?
No, it's It starts with a P. Patronizing. Thank you.
All right.
Because in our society, by the way, disagreement has become hatred. So you're no longer able to say I disagree with you because now I hate you. If what you think is right and I think is right, if they're wrong, because that's all part of the argument.
That's part of the fear syndrome that we're experiencing on a daily basis, because we don't want to be called a racist.
Correct. So worse than that, and what Chrysostom, to bring it back to Chrysostom, who says, maintain the fear of God. Keep God always in front of our eyes. And that's what he's saying is, if I'm afraid of what someone else is going to say about me, but I'm not afraid what God's going to say about me, now I've really got some problems. Shouldn't I be, and Chrysostom says this, shouldn't I be more worried about what God has to say about me than what some Yanni Yannikis has to say about me? Right? And that's our struggle, is that we're more worried about what Yanni thinks about us than what God thinks about us. Right? And that's part of our fallen world too. That's all part of it. However, the hope is that it's not about getting it right 100% of the time. It's about fighting against the temptation. And in my case, that means always going back to my weight program, always struggling to be under control, have my eating under control. Right? For other people it's this, for other people it's that. It's when we give up the fight that we lose the battle. Okay, so someone can come to me, and this has happened in real life, who says, I want to be Greek Orthodox, blah, 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 but I'm gay. I'm like, okay, we can talk about that later. Right? It's about struggling to take up the cross. And if that means you fall flat on your face 1,000 times, as long as you keep getting up and say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't, then you move forward.
I guess my point too is
that's real life.
I love, there's a lot of people in my life that are gay, and I love them.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not saying to reject gay people here.
No. And those
to end that way.
And those who are those who are homosexual or whatever are equally welcome in the church.
They've got to be.
They're equally welcome in the church. The church is a place for sinners to come and be healed. We are a hospital. The danger, as Chrysostom is pointing out, is if we don't think we're sick, then we don't want to be healed. That's the danger. The church is for everybody. The church calls everyone into her arms. Right? So there's absolutely, and that's part of the other dilemma we have in our society today. We're not saying people who struggle with sexuality have no place in the church. They're welcome in the church, just like obese people are welcome in the church. Okay? That doesn't mean the struggle is not real for them. All right? I'm not gonna. All right. That brings us to another end, and an exciting end tonight, for our Bible study on the book of Romans, according to the homilies of St John Chrysostom. I pray that you're enjoying this ministry here of our Be Transfigured Ministries in cooperation with the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Tarpon Springs, Florida. If you're ever in Tarpon Springs, we invite you to come join us in person. It's always more fun here in person. But in the meantime, till next week, God bless you. And oh, that's right. There is no Bible study next week. So for the next 2 weeks, God bless you. And don't forget to live a new life in Christ.
Be Transfigured is a production of Be Transfigured Ministries in cooperation with the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Cathedral in Tarpon Springs, Florida. We depend upon your generosity to maintain our ministry. You can make a safe online donation when you visit our website, liveanewlifeinchrist.org.